the attention of the British ambassador, even before I left New York, of the great anxiety being felt at what were clearly violations of the ceasefire agreement. The most specific point which I had made to the British ambassador then was the question of the presence of South African forces in Rhodesia. It is also clear from all indications so far that there are aspects of the agreement which are not being adhered to. The utilization of the auxiliary forces of Mr. Muzorera, the continued utilization, exclusive utilization of the Rhodesian army to the detriment of the spirit and the letter of the agreement. All these create an element of suspicion and create an atmosphere of you cannot expect that the international community really will sit on the evolution of the situation. But let me stress one point, and that is really the aim of the concern which has been repeatedly expressed by many leaders, by many African leaders, and has been expressed by the Security Council, lies in the desire of us all to ensure that Zimbabwe emerges as an independent country on the basis of the agreement collectively agreed upon in London. So really the thrust of our efforts must be to ensure the scrupulous implementation of this agreement, because it seems to me that it would be most unfortunate, indeed tragic, after all the efforts which have been done by all the parties concerned, by the freedom fighters of the Patriotic Front, and by the British government as the administering power, if after all these efforts, and the efforts of the Commonwealth leaders which took place in Lusaka, after all these efforts, then instead of having a peaceful resolution, we have an escalation of the conflict in Zimbabwe. With the President. As you know, I'm here on a short visit. It's a continuation of the visits which I have had to a number of countries at the invitations of the governments. I started first to go to New Delhi, where the United Nations has an interest in Rhodesia on two specific grounds. In the first place, as a colonial territory, Rhodesia has always been the responsibility of the United Nations. In the second place, since the declaration of the United Declaration of Independence in 1965, the United Nations has been actively involved in the problem of Rhodesia, beginning with the application of sanctions against that country. I made this point in New York immediately after the agreement in London. I said then, and I want to say now, that the Lancaster House Agreement constituted and constitutes an important breakthrough in the efforts to arrive at a genuinely negotiated settlement of the Rhodesian problem. Can freely determine their own future and their own destiny. This also implies that the election process must not only be fair, but must be perceived by the international community to be fair. Because moment in time, the British government, as the colonial power in Rhodesia, will ensure that the agreement which they are themselves a party will be scrupulously adhered to. I also hope that the efforts of the Commonwealth countries in general will bear fruition. That is as far as my discussions in respect to Rhodesia is concerned. Clearly, of course, we also discussed with the President the general international situation be observed. To create the conditions, fair conditions in Rhodesia, it becomes necessary to understand that this is a country which has witnessed more than a decade of an armed struggle. The UN has already done something. I think the Security Council has already taken an action, has already adopted a resolution calling for scrupulous and faithful implementation of the agreement. This is one step. I think anyone who perceives that the United Nations can be absolutely powerless, I think is misreading the one important thing, that is, for there to be a settlement in Rhodesia, it must be an internationally acceptable settlement. If there is no internationally acceptable settlement, we'll go back to square one. And I wouldn't interpret Britain's abstention as a total disregard for the United Nations position. In fact, I would hope, and I do believe that since Britain is a permanent member of the Security Council, if it did not agree with the position articulated by the Security Council, then it had the power and the authority to block that decision. By going along with the position, it seems to me that the British government is morally bound to do everything possible to adhere to the decision and the resolution of the international community. The interest of the British government, in as much as it is in the interest of Zimbabwe itself, of the African states, and of the United Nations, to realize a peaceful resolution to the problem of Zimbabwe. Go along without any drastic changes of the present policies, then it's an invitation to further escalation of violence and further escalation of conflict. And if there is a conflict situation instead of a resolution to the problem, anything is possible. And only then will the United Nations consider what's appropriate measures to be taken. And I should say one thing more, that is, the situation in Rhodesia is currently the topic of discussion and consideration by the Organization of African Unity at the ministerial meeting in Addis Ababa. The decisions that come from that meeting are going to be important in determining what further international action, if any, should be taken, whether at the United Nations level or at other levels.
Did you say you take some hope from the fact that Britain didn't vote against the Security Council resolution, that they abstained? But I'm wondering if either you or in your discussions with the President, if he...
Zimbabwe situation. From my own discussions, and I had the benefit when I was in New York to meet the British Prime Minister, to meet with the Foreign Secretary, Lord Carrington, and to meet with the British Ambassador. Now, you see, there is the international community reaction. It seemed to me that it would have been only logical when you have an agreement which has been agreed upon by all the parties concerned, and with the government as responsible as the British government, and a government which is a permanent member of the Security Council, that they will be the first one to do everything possible to ensure the scrupulous observance of the agreement. Well, thank you very much.